And so this is my number one. My number one is pray for God's presence in your life. And I want to stress this as number one. Why? Because I don't think that as many of us as Christians pray for God's presence of our lives because we don't recognize the power of God's presence. And so when I read the Bible, I see characters like Joseph. And while God's presence did not stop the events of Joseph's life, the presence of God caused Joseph's life to excel in spite of what happened in his life. And so one of the things I do like to point out about having the presence of God in your life is that the presence of God doesn't stop things from happening, but the presence of God enables you to excel in spite of the things that happen. And so, my number one, pray for God's presence. And I think it's important because most people come to church to feel the presence of God. Most people go to the house of God to feel the presence of God. But I want you to understand that God wants to be present in your life. And sometimes the reason that there are so many broken areas in our lives is because we do not have the presence of God in our lives. And I think sometimes that when you don't pray for God's presence in certain areas, it leaves you vulnerable to some things. And I had to learn this, that God's presence does work, but sometimes we don't understand how it works. And so I learned to get to a place where I wanted God's presence in everything. I had so many broken relationships that I said, God, I want you to be a part of my next one. I got so broke at one time, I ain't had no money. I said, God, I'm gonna need you to help me to navigate my finances. And so I want you to understand, look, my number one tonight, pray for God's presence. Why? Because God's presence is what's going to make the difference. And I had to do this. I started a couple of businesses, right? And I found out that God can lead you and guide you and direct you into making some good decisions, not just for church, but for your life. And I want to stress that, pray for God's presence in your life. I need your presence in my life, not just at church. We can shout at church all day, but I need God's presence in my life because I want to see my finances grow. I want to see my relationships last. I want to be a good parent to my children. And so I need God's presence to guide me when I want to say something. I need God's presence to tell me I need to chill out. I need God's presence to tell me maybe this is not a good idea right here for your business. Maybe this is not a good idea for your money. I need God's presence. All right. And so that's number one. Pray for God's presence. His presence is what's going to make the difference in your life. And so that's number one. And I'm not going to stay there too long because I got a lot of information.